especially last year, right? So I think a couple of things has to be said, lah, right? Number one is things are getting more and more expensive, right? So if we were to look at things like the OPR, right? So the OPR, what it is a reference rate, So every time when we borrow money, right, they actually have a certain percentage, right? So you'll notice OPR plus 1.5. So the 1.5 is what the bank keeps, and the OPR is the reference rate for the loan, right? So even your FD also, every time when they increase the OPR, what will happen is that your FD will also increase, right? So last year, what happened was, or 2 years ago, we could see that the OPR has been increasing. And every time when the OPR increases, what will happen is that loans will get more and more expensive, right? So every time when we get our salary, right, even before we can start even spending our salary, we have to start paying our loans, right? So once we already start paying our loans, this will see our disposable income shrinking, lah. Basically, that's number one. Second thing is things like our food expenses, right? So I always talked a little bit about about budgeting, right? So for budgeting, what we want to do is we want to write down all our expenses, right? And after we have written down all our expenses, we want to know whether it's a want or whether it's a need. Always remember things which are categorized as wants. This is where, it's a nice to have, right? Needs are things that we need to spend on for us to survive as human beings, right? So examples of expenses which can consider as needs would be as follows. Number one is our place where we stay, right? That's our first need. Second, it will be our food. We as human beings, we need to consume, right? Or we need to eat in order for us to survive, so on and so forth, right? The whole thing of it all is that when we look at the prices of food, right, especially when we were to look at the prices of rice, right, we could see that local rice, even though there is a price cap for local rice, but it's very difficult for us to find local rice. So right now we have to opt towards buying imported rice, and imported rice tends to be a bit more expensive. So every time when we buy things like rice, right, especially imported rice, it's a little bit more expensive. So when we actually have to spend more money on food, which is our necessity for us to survive, what will happen is that our disposable income will once again shrink, right? Like it or not, we as human beings, we need to eat at least three times a day, lah, basically, right? And imagine if someone likes to eat rice for their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So breakfast, maybe they have a nasi lemak. Lunch, they probably have a nasi campur, right? And dinner, they probably have another nasi campur, right? So every meal, if rice prices has increased, what will essentially happen is that every time a person consumes or eats, we could see that the increase in rice prices will see an increase in expenses lah, on a day-on-day basis, right? So as I mentioned, if a person eats 3 times a day, right, this would mean that every time when he eats a meal is a bit more expensive, right? That's the second reason why people cannot save money, right? Number one, as I mentioned, OPR. Number two, as I mentioned, inflation, right? And the third, I think, right, is this is an interesting one, right? is maybe it's our spending habit, right? So this is the example which I have, lah. I don't know whether you guys remember, when we were college kids, right? And before we even get our first job, right? This was where maybe we thought to ourselves, if only I can make about 2K, right, or 2,000 ringgit, I'll probably, I can save maybe 500 ringgit, something like that, lah. Because when we are college kids, we know how to really be thrifty, right? But once we start working, right, our first salary may seem a lot for us. Like, whoa, there's extra money here, there's extra money there, right? But that being said, however, I notice, as a person maybe grows older and older, right? Or the person actually gets more and more money. Every time when a person gets more and more money, what will happen is the expenses also would follow the earnings pattern, right? So sometimes what it is people's spending habit could probably be attributed to their income. Let me repeat this again. This is very important. People's spending habit could be attributed to how much of income they are making, right? So what I found quite useful to help me start budgeting, right, is this. Every month, before the money even comes into my disposable income, number one, I make sure I pay all my loans, all my loans. Number two, I make sure, whatever I need, expenditure for food, rental, electricity, I make sure I pay all of them, right? And then the third thing is from my wants bucket, I will keep some money or a small little allocation from that to put aside for my retirement fund, right? So, like I said, once we already keep that money aside, right, we will see. So, assuming after we have spent, assuming a person earns about 5K, right, or 5,000 ringgit, right? So maybe 1,000 for rental, maybe 1,000 for food, another 1,000 for electricity and whatnot. So the 2,000 is for a disposable income. Let's say before the 2,000 actually be reflected in our bank account, what I'll normally do is I will do a direct debit or auto debit. I'll take some money from that 2,000. Maybe I'll take out maybe 200 ringgit or something lah, or 300 ringgit, right? And then from there, the rest of the money, it's what I can use for lah, basically some leg room lah, basically, right? So like I said lah, one of the reasons why a lot of people find it very difficult to save nowadays is number one, like I said, costs of loans are getting more and more expensive. Number two, we could see that our needs, like our food, is getting more and more expensive. So when food gets more and more expensive, what will happen is that automatically, we as a human being, we need to survive, right? So we need to eat, right? So like it or not, if food prices goes up, our expenses will automatically go up. So that's the second reason. The third reason could be our wants or our lifestyle, right? So like I said, I noticed that people in their 20s or people when they earn a certain amount of money, right, they will spend a certain amount of money. And every time as their salary goes up, their expenses also were to follow suit, basically, right? So before that money actually hits into our bank account, what we can do is we can do a direct we can do a direct debit, or we can take out some money from our bank account to put that money aside for us to start saving, right? And as I mentioned, right, the power of saving is this particular story right here. I think I shared this story yesterday, right? Assuming there's this person, right? He finds it very difficult to save, right? In fact, he says that, hey, I find it very impossible to save. How to save, man? So what we can do is we can look at his habits, right? So assuming right now he likes to take a taxi to the office every day, right? Instead of taking a taxi, we just tell the person, I say, instead of taking a taxi, why don't you just take a MRT, right? So it's okay, he takes an MRT. And he saves about 7 ringgit, right? 7 ringgit a day. If the person takes that money and invests 7 ringgit a day, right, in a particular asset, which gives about 13%, right? So in 30 years, with only 2 habits, saving and investing, that's 7 ringgit. If we put it compounding interest in 30 years, that would be about 866K, right? You can actually use a compounding calculator right now, in fact, to actually fact check this, basically, right? So the next question right now is, I really talked a little bit about how to save, right? And I said that sometimes, right, our expenses may follow our lifestyle, right? So the next question is, if we find it very difficult to start saving, sometimes it could be also the motivation and the reason, right? So for me, to start something new, I need to have motivation. To be very honest with you guys, right? In fact, even to come on live also, I find it difficult, right? I find it difficult, so I need to have motivation. So my little golden nugget for this particular episode is this. Yesterday, I started talking a little bit about the power of compounding interest. Today, I started talking a little bit about, about savings and why is it so difficult to save, right? And I already broke it down into three factors, right? And then after that, I gave you a particular system. The system is to just every month just do a direct debit lah. You take out from your main account, you put it in a different bank account, right, where you cannot see that money. So you put that money aside every month, right? So before you can even start spending it, that money is not there anymore, right? And by that particular habit, right, sometimes when we don't see the money, sometimes we just don't spend on it lah, right? So I talked a little bit about having a system. And then the next thing is, how do we even get motivated to start to take the first step? Right? So I'll tell you a little motivation of mine on how I started my journey towards financial freedom lah, right? It's basically this lah, I used to work as an auditor, right? And during my audit days, right, we used to work, there's this thing called peak and off-peak period, right? Peak period is the busiest time for an auditor, right? They will get in the office around 8 o'clock. They will work sometimes up to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, So I still remember, and then that was peak period, right? And sometimes it will last for months, 3 or 4 months, We used to work from 8 o'clock to maybe 2 o'clock, 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock. So for me, the one day that really changed my life was one day when I was working right up to 3 o'clock. So I slept for a little bit. I woke up 8 o'clock. I went to the office. As I went to the office, I passed by a mosque, right? And I saw a lot of people praying. I was like, it's in the morning and whatnot. So I was wondering, what prayer is this? And I realized it was during the Hari Raya Haji, right? And for me, that was the one time I told myself, from this day onwards, I wanted to find a way to be financially free from working as a corporate guy lah, basically, right? So once I had the motivation, that was when I started saving money and putting money aside. So for today's episode, right, I would just maybe challenge any of the viewers out there. If you really want to start your journey towards financial freedom, right? Number one, have a goal. Ask yourself how much you want to have to save aside, right? How much you want to have save aside and by when? That's number one. Number two, this is more important, is to have a strong reason why. Why do you want to save that money, right? When you have a strong enough motivation, this will give you when you have a strong enough reason, this will give you motivation to take action. And the third thing is what one small step you can take right now, today, tomorrow at latest. Okay lah, give you guys a chance lah. By the end of the week lah. What one small action you guys can take in order for you to take that one step towards your financial freedom. So answer these three questions, right? If you want to take this challenge lah, right? This is the second day of the New Year's already, right? So if you want to maybe kumpul maybe 5K, right? Like I said, you need to have a very clear goal. You need to have a very clear goal, number one. Number two, you have to ask yourself, why do you want this goal? If the goal is important for you enough, you'll find a reason, right? The third thing is what one small action you need to take. The fourth thing is by when you want to achieve that particular amount, right? So I taught you the importance of setting a New Year's resolution. The second thing is what one small action you can take towards your New Year's resolution, right? I hope that you found this episode useful. If there's any questions, do ask. I see a couple of people, right? If not, Thank you so much for joining this particular episode, and I hope to see you guys in the upcoming episode, right? Like I said, I'm going to try to have this as often as possible. I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk to you the step-by-steps on trying to get some financial freedom, right? In the upcoming episodes, after we already talked a little bit about saving and whatnot, then we'll probably talk a little bit about investing. We're going to talk about stocks and whatnot, right? But number one, if we do not have our savings down, or if we do not know, if we do not have any money kept aside, right, then very susah for us to invest, right? So in order to even start investing, we need to have some money kept aside. So that's one of the reasons why I'm talking about budgeting. And that's one of the reasons why I've broken it down to the very basic about budgeting, right? Again, I'm talking about the very basics. Why is it so difficult to save nowadays? Basically, a lot of things. Number one, as I mentioned, inflation. Number two, as I mentioned, even our cost of our borrowing also has gone up. And the third thing could be our lifestyle, right? So what we can do is maybe keep aside some money every month, right? And then once we already kept aside some money, then maybe we can start talking about investing, right? But without even saving, we cannot even start step two. So step one is to start saving. But before we can even save, we need to have a game plan. So I shared with you the step-by-step on how to have a game plan. I hope that you found this particular live session fruitful. I hope to see you guys very, very soon. I'm just going to wait for a couple more questions. I don't see any. All right, guys. Good night. I hope that you found this episode useful. If not, I'll see you guys in the next live. Take care, guys.